Thank you.
Ready to go? They just have to.
It's on right now. No. So yeah, I make my own flat horse. We keep $1,000 aside if we can. Myself to and then I think this is the first offer. Try to keep it right. It's something to do.
The hour of 6:30 p.m. having arrived, I will call to order the regular meeting of the Planning Board. This meeting is being broadcast live on the City of Keene YouTube channel. The video is also streamed on the city's website and is posted on the website by the end of the next business day, barring any technical difficulties. Anyone wishing to view a copy of the agenda and supporting materials will find it on the city website. To receive electronic copies of future agenda packets, please go to the home page and subscribe to the city meetings email list. The public and other board members will be recognized to ask questions and make comments on the agenda item under discussion. After being recognized, all remarks are to be made through the chair. Will staff please call the roll?
Pamela Russell Slack,
Present.
David Orgaz,
Present.
Mayor George Hansel,
Here.
Councilor Remy,
Here.
Harold Farrington,
Present.
Roberta Mastrogiovanni, Armando Rangel,
Present.
Emily Levine Bernier. Here. Gail Summers, Randon Markelon, Tammy Adams, Kenneth Cost.
Here. Present.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from June 27th, 2022?
Madam Chair, I'd move to accept the minutes as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Are there any questions, comments, changes? Mr. Farrington.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In reading the minutes, I had identified a few typographical and perhaps technical errors, so I'd like to enter those into the record if I may.
Yes, please.
Line 92 seems to be a word missing before the word month, either a month or 1 month. Line 288, I believe the word one at the end of the sentence should be replaced by the word would. W-O-O-D.
Recording in progress.
Line 591 should read Fuller School and not Fuller Street. Line 610 perhaps should read park or be able to be parked at the end of that line. Line 627 should add the word is before going. Line 647 should add the word to before runoff. Line 678 should add the word is after logging. Line 679 should read an intent to cut. And finally, line 728, correction of Mr. Cost's spelling of his name. Those are all the items. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Well, thank you. Does anyone else have any edits or comments? All in favor? Thank you. So the first item on the agenda is SPR 423, modification number 4/site plan, Corning Specialty Materials, 69 and 0 Island Street. Applicant Leighton A. White Incorporated, on behalf of owner Island Mill Realty Group, proposes to install electrical equipment and modify the parking on the properties located at 69 Island Street. Tax map numbers 583-010-000-000-000 and 0 Island Street. Tax map number 582-048-000-000-000. These combined parcels are 9.2 acres in size and are located in the Commerce District. I invite the applicant to speak to this request. Mr. Miller?
Good evening. I'm the operations manager at the Corning facility. We're requesting this extension due to not being able to fill the conditional approval regarding the lease between the city and our landlord. At this time, the city and the landlord are still working to resolve the parking spaces between the bike trail and our parking lot that was identified during our plan submission back in January.
Do any board members have any questions of the applicant? Okay, thank you. I invite staff for comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mary Brunner, Senior Planner. So the applicant is requesting a first extension to the time frame to meet the conditions of approval. The Planning Board regulations state that for a first extension, the respective decision-making authority shall grant a first extension of the approval if the applicant demonstrates the necessity of the extension and provides an update on the status, about the nature of the project and its status. So because this is a first extension request and the applicant has given an update on the status of the project and the need, I believe that they've met the board's requirements, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mary. Does anyone have questions for staff? Mayor Hansel.
I have a motion, Madam Chair, if we're ready for that. I would move to grant the 6-month extension to the time frame to meet the conditions of approval for site plan application SPR-423, modification number 1.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion or any edits? All in favor? Thank you. Mary, I have a question. Is it too late for me to bring something up from the bottom of the agenda that I think is important for the board to hear first?
Nope, you can take the agenda out of order as long as no one else on the board objects.
Okay, so let me see what the board says. I would like to bring up the staff updates because there's something I feel that you need to hear before something else comes before the board, but if there's any objections, I won't do that. Is there any objection? Okay, thanks. Mary, could you give us a staff update, please?
Sure. So under staff updates, we had listed the administrative and minor project approvals that have been issued between January and June of 2022. And those were included at the end of the packet. And I'm not going to go through each of them one by one. However, if any board members have questions about those approvals that were issued either administratively or by the minor project review committee, you can ask them now, or you can always reach out to the community development department at any time. You have, as a board, you've delegated your authority to the minor project review committee for site plan approvals and to staff for administrative planning approvals. And so we just keep you updated on those periodically. The other update tonight is that there was a New Hampshire Supreme Court decision that was issued last week, Thursday. This is George Sturgio versus the City of Dover. The opinion was issued on July 21st. And can you hear me better now? Okay, great. And we just wanted to bring this to your attention because you're going to see a little bit of a change to a very small change to the language and the recommended language for the motions tonight in order to make sure that we're complying with some new rules or some new interpretation of state law regarding conditional approvals from planning boards. And I'm not going to go into too much detail tonight, but I think at your next meeting, the city attorney will be coming either early or late, and we'll have an adjournment for legal advice so that the city attorney can brief you more fully on the implications of this case law.
Thank you very much, Mary. Does anyone have any question? Okay. Item 2 on the agenda, boundary line adjustment, S-06-22, boundary line adjustment, 1 Ralston Street and 0 Emerald Street. Applicant Nancy Sheldon on behalf of owners Sheldo LTD, the City of Keene, and Braden Property Holdings, LLC, proposes a lot line adjustment between the 0.39 acre property at 1 Ralston Street, tax map number 583-032-000-000, the 0.73 acre property at 0 M Street, tax map number 583-033-001-000-000, and the 0.37 acre property at 19 Ralston Street, tax map number 583-001-000-000, to accommodate the purchase of a 0.11 acre parcel known as Railroad Spur from the City of Keene to be incorporated to the Ralston Street and 19 Ralston Street properties. The properties are located in the downtown growth district. Does staff have recommendation for completion of the project?
We do, Madam Chair. Jesse Rounds, Director of Community Development. The applicant has requested exemptions from providing a grading plan, landscaping plan, lighting plan, and technical reports. After reviewing this request, staff has determined that exempting the applicant from submitting this information would have no bearing on the merits of the application.
Thank you. A motion to accept the application is complete.
Madam Chair, I'd move to find the application complete.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. So I invite the applicant to present on the proposal.
Wendy Pelletier for Cardinal Surveying, representing Shaldo Limited. So this is the existing property. This is Emerald Street. Center at Keene is across the road. Ralston Street. There's a current factory building, warehouse building that's been unused for many, many years. And then Braden Printing is right here. In blue is the parcels that the city owns. This is a current entrance to the rail trail. And this is what is considered the railroad spur. And this is what the city has an agreement with Shaldo to buy this piece. In doing so, Braden's has some property that encroaches on both of these areas. So Shaldo, after buying this, will be selling a portion of this lot to Braden so that all of their property is on one piece. And they will also be issuing an easement for there's an entrance back here. So you can see that over here. This will be in blue what the city portion will look like after the adjustment. In pink is what the Shaldo's will own. So they'll own this spur line here. And then Braden's will take over this little orange piece. We'll give them a little bit, not frontage, but access to their rear parking lot from Davis Street. Happy to answer any questions.
Do board members have questions for the applicant? Anyone? Thank you. And I invite staff for comments. I think
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jesse Rounds, Director, Community Development. Just wanted to expand briefly on the, well, I can get into that in a little bit, I guess, but expand briefly on the issue of the encroachments. Staff recommends that the applicant submit documentation of the easements to be reviewed by the city attorney to be included as a condition of approval. Just wanted to mention that. In addition, in terms of analysis, there's no new development proposed, so because there's no new development, we don't see any impact to traffic and access management or to surface waters or wetlands. So no other comments beyond that.
Does anyone have any questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, I invite anyone from the public to ask any questions or provide comments, if there is anyone here from the public. Okay, so at this moment, I will close the public comment portion. Does anyone else have any other questions from the board about this? If not, I'm going to ask for a motion, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to approve S-06-22 as shown on the plan identified as boundary line adjustment lots 583-032-000, 583-033-001, and 583-031-000, 1 Ralston Street and Emerald Street, Keene, New Hampshire 03431, prepared by Cardinal Land Surveying and Land Planning on a scale of 1 inch equals 20 feet, dated July 12th, 2022, with the following conditions precedent. Prior to the signature by Planning Board Chair. Owner's signature appears on plan, and number 2 is submittal of a draft easement document which shall be subject to review by the city attorney.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. The next item on the agenda is the continued public hearing, S-04-22, Conservation Residential Developmental Subdivision, and SPR-04-22, Site Plan-Drummer Road. Applicant and owner Christopher Ferris proposes to subdivide the 13.1 acre parcel located at 0 Drummer Road, tax map number 515-015-000-000, into 6 lots and construct 5 multifamily buildings. 4 of the lots are proposed to be developed into 5-unit multifamily residences. 1 lot is proposed to be developed as a 6-unit multifamily residence, and the remaining lot would be conserved as open space. The developable lots are proposed to have access from Timberlane Drive via a shared private driveway and vary in size from 0.3 to 1.2 acres. The open space lot is 9.5 acres. Waivers are requested from Section 25.10.8.B.2 of the Land Development Code regarding the requirement to prepare a survey that shows all metes and bounds of the revised parcel. Section 20.14.3.d regarding the requirement that all of off-street parking be located to the side or rear of buildings, and Section 19.3.5.a.3.a regarding the requirement that all structures be accessed from interior streets. The site is in the low-density district. I invite the applicant. Please state your name. Yes, that's fine, thank you.
Christopher Ferris. I am the applicant. you folks probably have, let's see, 3 letters. One that was addressing water concerns, one that was addressing traffic. If you have any questions or comments on those, I'd be happy to address them. I think the letters are pretty thorough. The other issue, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, and I'm sure Mary will address this. There is an issue. This will end up being continued, presumably tonight. But I thought while we're here, we could address a couple of these things that were from last time. And the most important thing is just the architectural stuff, because I want to make sure the board's happy with what is proposed now. That way, we can kind of keep rolling forward. So that's really it, unless, Mary has other things she wants to address.
I'll wait for Mary, but I do know it's going to be continued, and I do appreciate you coming forward and bringing the new design. So if you could put them up,
Yep.
that would be great. Thank you.
The rest of the drawings are fairly mundane, but basically, the principle of the structure is virtually identical. As you may recall, in the previous, this was just a square. The roofs were flat or pitching rearward. This just adds a gable, gables in both directions. This drawing, the two plans will be merged to some degree. These decks will go the width as in the other plan. And there's a reason for that. It has to do with the garage under aspect of it. But basically, it would look, it would be indistinguishable from this drawing.
Mayor Hansel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So but the gable jut-out parts are gonna stay the same? So it's
Yes.
just the porches are just gonna go width to width?
The width, because the porches, this projects over here, over the garage, so we'll project it all the way. This was done somewhat quickly to address the look.
Gotcha.
If the board has copies of the original shows these being full width, and they will be full width, but other than that, it's I didn't want to have them completely complete the plan until we were on the same page, but I think their modification is, well, I hope it's what you guys were looking for, honestly. Color-wise, grays, whites, again, this is basically the model. Unless the board has any specific objection, it's pretty straightforward, color-wise and whatnot. The other one was for the benefit of the mayor. The other one was kind of a green color with some red. It is different. So, and I heard people were crazy about it. So, I
was just trying to figure out when you brought it forward last time of how it kind of fit into the community and other properties, and I just couldn't see it. This I can see. I appreciate you bringing that back to the board. Do any other board members have any other questions or comments?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Mr. Clark. Welcome.
As I recall last time, sorry, the air conditioning units or the mechanicals were either going to go on the roof or on the ground. I don't think it was decided. So does this still
these
allow?
will pretty much have to go on the ground
Yeah,
now.
that's what was my question.
So
Okay.
yes, they'll be
Thank
on the
you.
ground somewhere, probably to the rear, I presume, of the building or the ends. We'll keep them out of as much as you can keep something out of you, we'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else from the board have any questions for Mr. Ferris? Okay, thank you.
Does the board have any comment on those letters? I just want to make sure that they sufficed for your needs. I can, Mr. Noonan sent them in, I think.
I do not. Mary, was staff going to mention these at all?
So, Madam Chair, I have a letter for you tonight that was sent in today. I don't know, I have the original traffic analysis and the original drainage report that was submitted with the application.
Okay. There were two letters sent on July 11th, and I can paraphrase quickly, you know, or I mean,
Sure.
okay. Planning board, this is Fieldstone writing. I'll skip the introduction paragraph. There were concerns in general of just water, because so the board is clear, I think most of you on the walkthrough, very far down the hill, far from where we're actually building, is a big, huge wetland. I mean, it's what it is. Though all of Drummer Conservation drains there. I mean, it is the wetland for that area. So there are houses on the Drummer side that probably used to be part of this parcel that have wet basements, et cetera, because that's the nature of the beast, unfortunately. Fieldstone confirmed in their letter, as part of the site plan application, we submitted a stormwater management report, which included an outline of how stormwater will be handled and the correlating HydroCAD models. Drainage systems are designed to treat stormwater and reduce the rate of runoff during rainfall events. This is done by modeling how water flows off the site in the pre-development condition and designing the stormwater systems to match or decrease the amount of rainwater in the post-development condition. The model takes into account the surface conditions of the land, where the pre-development land is woods and the post-development land is a combination of pavement, grass lawns, and building roofs. These models are completed for 3 storm events, the 2-year, 10-year, and 50-year. These are the storm events that must be modeled if a project requires an alteration of terrain permit with New Hampshire DES. This project is under the threshold and does not actually require this alteration of terrain permit. However, the stormwater system was designed to these same state standards. He gets a little more detail after that. So, in essence, what he's saying is even though we weren't required to, the stormwater treatment meets the standard for an alteration of terrain permit. It far exceeds what we would normally be required to do because it made sense to do so. The traffic, he doesn't have as much detail on because, of course, that was done by some traffic study engineering firm. But he does talk about an increase of 5 to 6 vehicles per hour to the north of the intersection and 5 to 7 vehicles per hour to the south of the intersection. I mean, all new construction, new housing is going to have some traffic impact. That area is not a high traffic area. I mean, you can stand on Timberland Road for quite a while and not see a single car, you know. And of course, it impacts the more you drive toward the city. But anyways, I just wanted to. The concerns were not necessarily clear to him, so he tried to address them, and I want to make sure he did address them, is what I'm trying to say.
I know that at the last meeting, there were some questions about the parking, but my understanding is that that has been met, and the requirements have been fulfilled for the amount of parking that's required per unit. But I'm going to let Mary answer that question, but thank you very much. Thank you, Mary. It's your turn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mary Brunner, Senior Planner. So I'm going to go over new information that has been submitted tonight. I'm not going to rehash the original staff report that was provided to you. However, if there are any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. So just to quickly review, at the last planning board meeting, the public hearing for this application was opened. And there were a number of questions and concerns that were raised by abutters, specifically regarding traffic and parking, architecture and visual appearance. And then I think the biggest one was the drainage and stormwater runoff was a really big concern that was raised by abutters, and also echoed by the board. And so since the last planning board meeting, the applicant has submitted new information. And also, we as staff, I followed up with our engineering department to see if there were any concerns about specifically the drainage and stormwater runoff and traffic. So I'm just going to run through those really quickly. So the first one is with drainage and stormwater management. I confirmed with city engineering staff that the applicant has actually exceeded the city's standards when it comes to demonstrating that the proposed project will not increase the amount of stormwater runoff, both in terms of volume or velocity from the site, and in fact may actually result in a slight decrease. And that's because they are building, and that's when the system is built properly and maintained properly. So as designed, it will, if it's built properly and maintained properly, as designed, it will actually result in a slight decrease of runoff leaving the site. And that's because they've designed the detention basin to hold water and then slowly infiltrate it into the ground, so it will actually be slowing down the water that's entering the wetland from that hill. And they did use a 50-year storm event as their design storm, where the city requires a 25-year storm event. So that standard does appear to be met. Sorry, can you hear me? Okay. With respect to screening, the only thing I want to mention here, there's no new information regarding screening. However, due to the number of concerns that were raised by abutters about the visual impact of this development, staff continue to recommend that a no-cut buffer be placed over that 30-foot vegetated buffer between the road and the development. That's already shown on the site plan. This would just be an extra step to ensure that if it does get cut down in the future, that it will be, there's something that we can hold them to replant it. So that's really the purpose of that recommended condition of approval. With respect to lighting, at the last meeting, staff noted that we didn't have cut sheets for the proposed light fixtures, so we weren't able to determine if it met our standards. Since then, the applicant submitted a new cut sheet for a different light fixture, and I included a picture or an image of that fixture in your packet, and that does meet all of our standards. With respect to traffic and access management, as the applicant just mentioned, there was a letter that was submitted, and I apologize, I did not, I think I must have just missed that email, and I didn't include the letter in your agenda packet, but I will do that for the next meeting. But basically, I talked to city engineering staff, and their take on this was that the city requires a 200-foot all-season safe site distance at any access points, and this location exceeds that requirement just because it is a straight road, and so there's really no barriers. If you're pulling out onto the road, you're going to have a really clear view both up and down the road as you're pulling out. And so they have met the city's standards for the access and safety. And with respect to the questions about overflow parking and on-street parking, while the board doesn't have any standards related to parking, I did want to quickly address those. So the city's requirements for the amount of parking that a developer has to provide are actually in the zoning ordinance. And so based on the city's zoning ordinance, a minimum of 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit are required, and the applicant has met that requirement. And the planning board really doesn't have standards around parking. So while I think that that's a concern that you've heard, unfortunately, the board doesn't really have a way to, as long as that standard has been met for zoning, I think that standard has been met. With respect to overflow parking, if people wanted to park on the street, that's actually regulated under Chapter 94, Article 3 of City Code, which would fall under the purview of City Council. And this section prohibits any on-street parking that would obstruct the movement of traffic in the travel lane, and it also prohibits parking on a public way where the wheel of a parked vehicle is behind the painted lines in the roadway. So based on staff's understanding of this section, on-street parking could occur on the opposite side of Timberlane Drive, so the side that doesn't have the sidewalk. So there does appear to be space there for a car to park on the shoulder of the road without impeding the travelway. With respect to architecture and visual appearance, the applicant has submitted a revised design concept for the front building facade, which you saw tonight, in an attempt to address some of the concerns that were raised by the board at the last meeting. At this point in time, staff still don't have enough information to determine whether the proposed buildings are in compliance with the 2-story maximum height requirement in zoning for the low-density district. So that continues to be an issue that would have to be either addressed prior to the next meeting, or we could include that as a condition of approval. And then finally, one thing that was not included that was just discovered today while Jesse, Mr. Rounds and I were meeting with the city attorney, it came to staff's attention that there's actually another issue with zoning compliance with this application. I'm going to try and explain this, but basically, prior to the Land Development Code being adopted, the conservation residential development option was actually a conditional use permit application process. And conditional use permits live in the zoning ordinance. With the Land Development Code, we thought we were making it simpler by just making it a subdivision application. But when we did that, we broke the connection between the subdivision regulations and the zoning ordinance. So right now, the uses that are allowed in the conservation residential development subdivision regulations are not reflected in the zoning ordinance, and that was just an oversight. We consider that to be a glitch. However, it's a glitch that needs to be fixed before the board can act on this application. And so that is entirely staff's fault, and we have already submitted an ordinance to fix that issue. However, the ordinance process takes a minimum of 2 months. So while that's working through the process, unfortunately, the board cannot approve this application. However, with the agreement of the applicant, you can continue the application until later when hopefully that issue will be fixed. So that's our recommendation to you tonight, and you do have a letter which I put on your desk that includes the request in writing to continue the application to the September 26th, 2022 Planning Board meeting, and also a statement from the applicant saying that they're waiving the 65-day timeframe to review the application under the state RSA 676-4. So I'm happy here to answer any questions. I know that that's a little bit confusing, but basically the long and short is that we identified a glitch in the LDC that we have to fix before you can vote on this application.
Do board members have any questions? Councilor Remy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As far as the 2 floors and the parking piece, what is the resolution for that? What's the next step for figuring out if that's okay or not?
Sure. So in talking with the applicant, I think that they have met the 2-story requirement. We just need documentation that shows that. So it is likely, I think there was just some minor changes to grading that they needed to do in order to make sure that that lower parking level meets the definition of a basement level, which wouldn't count towards that 2-story limit. But we just need to get documentation to show that before we can sign off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Ms. Levine.
This may be a I'm still learning question as far as the process of going back to the drainage. I think you've said a few times if the whole system is built properly and maintained properly. So if it meets our standards and that's what we're held to and that goes forward, then what are the steps as far as built well and maintained properly?
Great question. So in terms of making sure that it's built properly, that will be handled through site inspections throughout the construction process. We as staff go out to the site. Usually most of the inspections happen through the building permit process, but we do some site plan inspections as well. And so we will most likely bring city engineering staff out with us to make sure the system is being constructed properly. And in terms of maintenance, that will be the responsibility of the homeowners association. And so we will be requiring some sort of documentation of an easement or cross easement or something to show that that maintenance those maintenance duties are clearly defined. And then from that point, if it's not maintained properly, it would really be a complaint-driven process. And we could use the site plan to make sure that they're keeping it maintained into the future.
Do any other board members have any other questions? Mayor Hansel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd move to continue. Nope. Okay.
I'm sorry. So, right now, I know there are people here from the public, and because this is a public hearing, you will be invited up to speak if you would like, with any questions or any comments, but you need to come forward with your name and what your address is, but this public hearing is going to be continued into September as well. But I know there are people here from the neighborhood, and if anyone would like to speak, here's the microphone. Name and address, please.
Hi, I'm Teresa Quigley. I live at 9 Drummer Road. I am one of the abutters, as you're affectionately calling us. I'm very concerned, as my neighbors will talk about the water and drainage flow. I'm wondering who will be in charge of maintaining that drainage that he talked about that years from now, and what kind of recourse we have as residents, some of us 30, 40 years, when our yards and basements will surely flood. Mr. Ferris reminds us we are in a wetland area. Water is flowing down. We know what's going to happen. It's been happening. I challenge the adequacy of the traffic and the water studies. I'm concerned about Fuller School being at capacity already. I have reviewed some of the standards that your planning board is considering when these applications come to you, one of which is the school system. And so I am concerned about potentially 25 extra families being in this school system. Just want to make sure I hit all my notes here. I think that's basically it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I do want you to understand that as the planning board, we don't have any say about the school system. Just saying. Is there anyone else that would like to come forward to speak?
I'm Mark Van Son. I live at 62 Meeting House Road at the top of Drummer Hill. I thank you, Mary, for explaining the interplay between the Conservation Development Code and the Land Development Code, because as I was reading this, I was trying to figure out the sequencing of it. It didn't seem logical to me.
Can you just, I'm sorry, can you speak into the mic a little bit?
Oh, okay. Anyway, thanks for explaining the interplay and noting that there further work needs to be done, an extended hearing. Two concerns on the depiction, whether you look at the Conservation Code or the Land Development Code. 35 feet's the maximum on the Conservation Code. 3 stories on the Land Development Code. That didn't look like a basement below grade, so I know that's being clarified. I look forward to hearing more on that, more for aesthetic reasons. Final point on traffic. Mary, you noted that parking should be allowed on the shoulder if there is adequate back and forth movement of opposing traffic. Right now, there is not on Timber Lane. There's 2 lanes. There is a shoulder, but there is not a shoulder adequate, from my point of view, for parking. There's also not, as many people in our neighborhood know, there is no parking on Timber Lane or in Meeting House between, I think, November 1st and the end of April, May 1st, to make room for snow removal. So are you, for that overflow parking, because it's clearly going to be needed, 20 52 parking or 54 parking spaces for 26 units. We all have had kids with a third, fourth car, visitors, parties. It's ridiculous to think that that's sufficient, that parking on the on the premises itself. So there'll be overflow, quite a lot. You can't park for that extended period of winter. I just want to make sure the council knows that and has to accommodate that, as well as accommodate any structural changes that'll need to be made to accommodate if you do decide to widen a shoulder, paint those parking spaces, provide adequate lighting, whatever zoning laws are in effect for on-street parking, because it's not there now. It's made for two-way traffic. We all have seen when there's a car parked in Timber Lane or on Meeting House Road on one side of the road, you cannot pass without waving the other person on. And that width of the road doesn't change, at the lower end of Timber Lane where this development is. So those are my comments, thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
Dave Ploppert, 10 Drummer Road, Keene, New Hampshire. My question, if it could be answered or checked into, on the water flow wastewater test, that was based on 2 people per unit, not multifamily. So the amount of wastewater and sewage and water use is going to be based on 2 people per unit, 2-bedroom.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mary, do you,
Madam Chair, did you want me to address that question?
yes,
or-
could you please?
Yes, so I believe the sewer flow calculations that were done were based on 2 bedrooms per unit with a total of 26 units. So they did count, so each building has 5 units, or there's one building that has 6 units in it. And so they took that into account with the sewer flow calculations based on the total number of bedrooms, which is how they estimate the number of people. And yep, so a total of 26 units at 2 bedrooms per unit was used for the sewer calculations.
2 people per unit. Multifamily.
I'm sorry, can you come back up to the mic, please, Mr. Ploppert?
That was based on 2 people living in a 2-bedroom apartment.
I'm not sure if they assumed 2 people per unit or they assumed 2 bedrooms per unit. I don't know if that equates to 2 people or if they would assume a larger family could live in that or
26
not.
units, 2 bedrooms, 52 bedrooms, all 5 buildings, 2 people. When Flow Assessments did the test for Fieldstone.
Yep, and I will
So
note,
basically, if there's a multifamily, 3 or 4 people living in a unit, that's going to increase sewage and water, going from an 8-inch pipe down to a 6-inch pipe down on Elm Street.
okay. So I
So
can
you-
follow up with the city engineering department and.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, Board.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions from the public?
Paul Kutras, 59 Meeting House Road in Keene.
I'm sorry, can you speak just a little louder? Unfortunately, we've got a floor air conditioner, so it's hard to hear up here.
Paul Kutras, 59 Meeting House Road, Keene.
Thank you.
First of all, I just premise my discussion here, my comments on the fact that I think everyone in the room realizes that there's a dearth of adequate housing here in Keene. We need housing. We know that. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. But realistically, there are ways to do it that are appropriate, particularly depending on where you live in Keene, what the region is, and those that are less appropriate. This is an apartment complex as far as I'm concerned going up. The god-awful looking buildings, I apologize to the developers, but they're straight up, they're boxes that are thrown up there that it's essentially an apartment complex going up in a region that's surrounded completely on all four sides by single-family dwellings. That's not appropriate here. It's not even close. I initially thought that when they start to develop, I said, oh, good, they'll put 5 to 10 houses there. That's fine. I have no issue with that. But that's not at all what's going up. The density in that area is terrific. It's much different than any place else in the region. It's more appropriate, better suited for the center of Keene than it is here peripherally near the hospital in a residential area. I'm a little surprised that we haven't discussed that a little bit more, because appropriateness matters. Not to mention the fact, to me, it's a bit of an eyesore. I've seen the renditions of it. This is not something that's going to be excluded in the woods or something like that. It's readily visible from the road. Anyone who drives up will notice that there's 10 feet of deciduous trees that for 8 months out of the year won't have a leaf on them. We're going to see everything. And fortunately, I'm further up on the hill where this isn't going to directly impact me. But that's not the same for the people down in Drummer and Elm Street, too. It's an eyesore and really worthy a topic of discussion. I would have no issues whatsoever if these were single-family dwellings or even duplexes that were placed in an appropriate way. That's my first point. The second point is it's a lot of people. The concentration, again, it's not representative of the whole region of Keene that we're in. This is, again, it's a residential district with high-density housing going in here. You have potentially 50 cars that will exit with one point of egress onto Timber Lane. And yes, I understand there was a traffic study that suggests approximately, I think, 8, if I'm not mistaken, 8 cars per hour will be the average. But we know, none of us really care. I don't care what the traffic is like between 3 and 4 a.m., which is part of the averaging. What I'm concerned about is when I go to work or if we take kids to school, between 7 and 9, now you have potentially 50 additional cars exiting through one point of egress onto Timber Lane, which is a steep hill, especially in the winter, that can be very icy. You're going to have log jams at the T-corners, both along Timber Lane and Elm Street, as well as Court Street and Elm Street. It's unreasonable. It's going to change everything, the dynamics of going to work, between going to work in the morning or coming home. Again, I don't think it's been discussed enough, and I think that's a misrepresentation to look at that traffic study and say, oh, we don't have to worry about just 8 cars an hour. That's an average. That doesn't really impact it. The last thing I would add is that, some of the topics that have been discussed or touched upon by other individuals, again, we have, we're basically living on Drummer Hill, 50% of the population. There's going to be a 50% population increase without real infrastructure enhancement. And I am worried about how that will really impact it. I don't think there's been a good study that comforts me with regards to how we'll be able to respond there. But my first 2 concerns are really the issues that I really think should be at hand and should be discussed a little bit more. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, can you hear me? My
Yeah.
name is Charles Ferrando. I live on 83 Timber Lane Drive. And before I start, I'm here, Mr. Nate Carboni couldn't be here. His wife was evidently expecting or due yesterday, and he's using that as an excuse not to be here.
I'm sorry, but you just need to speak a little louder.
I'm sure.
And right into that mic.
I'm sorry, I'm not. Nate Carboni, one of the, lives on Elm Street. I don't have his exact address. He shared some photos with me. May I share these with you, Madam Chair? These pictures are going to show the stream that's behind his house at what we call a normal water level. The one that I want to draw your attention to, there's 2. There's the picture, which I'll bring up and can be shared, picture of the culvert, which he says he's seen overflow, and I have too. And it's also a picture from early August of last year after the 5 inches of rain, where that stream is almost overflowed into his property, and this is before any of these changes that are supposed to reduce flow. But so far, everyone who lives on this hill is doubting those figures. So if I may approach.
You can actually just start it right here. Thanks.
At its highest level, this is the normal level. You can see it will not take much more. It's driven, I would say approximately 2 feet, maybe more. This is that storm culvert, which overflows, and it comes close to overflowing into the river. We all So these pictures will show vividly some of the concerns of the people on Drummer Hill and Drummer Road that we have. I know we keep hearing these studies, but you're overriding the experience of the people who have lived there for years. I work with the Goose Pond Subcommittee. We just, actually 2 weeks ago, we walked some of the trails because we need to look at getting water off the trails because there's more erosion. At the trailhead on Drummer Road, we're going to have to do maintenance because it's now getting very wet when in the spring. As far as some of the other points, and again, in no particular order, I would like to say, in terms of the parking, it jogged my memory when I saw the pictures. I lived, the first place I ever bought in Manchester, New Hampshire, on Bismarck Street, was exactly this design. Garage under, 2 stories above. So we each had, as they say, 2 parking spaces. This is one building of 8 units. In my memory, because it's 40 years ago, we had an additional 8 to 10 parking spaces for guests. As I understand now, there's only, and forgive me, 2 spaces for each of the 26 units, plus 2 additional spaces. That is, unless that's modified, that is clearly inadequate. Secondly, as Mary pointed out, there might be parking on the other side of the road, not the side on Timber Lane. And even if somehow these people would pull off completely, they will not be able to do that in the winter because there's going to be snow embankments. Secondly, knowing the way human nature is, they're going to be parking, pulling over the sidewalk and blocking that sidewalk. It's going to happen unless something is done to prevent that. I don't know how that would be done. Secondly, according to the figures that it's the page 56 and 57 of the Office of Strategic Initiative Planning, Planning Board Handbook, Chapter 5. It states, and I'm quoting, you go look it up, the number is V26 and 27, scaled depending on the type of subdivision, the average number of bedrooms per residential dwelling, 100 homes may represent an additional anywhere from 25 to 200 school-aged children. And this is what I've highlighted. The planning board should assess whether existing schools can accommodate the anticipated increase or whether expanded transportation services or additional classrooms will be necessary. So I don't know the rules and regulations. I'm just stating what I saw is according to the state. So I think some of these things need to be considered. Secondly, we challenge, as several people have, the amount of sewer usage, but I haven't heard the water usage. Again, citing some of the same page, 100 new dwelling units may draw 40 to 50,000 gallons of water per day. The planning board should determine the effect of this increased use on the municipal water supply, private water supplies, or groundwater for individual wells. This means on a daily basis, 10 to 12,000 gallons of water will have to come out of that water cistern. And I guess this is a question for Mary or your city planners. Will that be adequate? Will it be able to handle that? I don't know if you know the answer to that, but that is a question I have, and I think it needs to be looked into.
Mary, being a city planner, would you like to answer that question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to water supply, there is sufficient water supply.
Yes.
The City Engineering Office did look into that. And then with respect to the impact on the school system, we do have a standard relating to scattered and premature development that's really geared towards development that's occurring kind of in the outskirts of the city where, in like a greenfield situation. In this instance, it's infill development, and so we don't really have a standard that specifically addresses infill development and its impact on the school system. So that scattered and premature development standard is really geared towards developments that are happening out on the outskirts of the city, maybe where roads don't exist yet, where the school bus route will have to be extended out where it doesn't go already. That's really what it's intended for, and it doesn't necessarily apply in this situation. And so I can only speak to the standards that we have in Keene,
Sure.
and that's what we have.
Well, thank you. I'm just pointing out that in the last board, and I think I hope I get your name right, Ms. Quigley said that the Fuller School is already at capacity, and that's probably where those kids will have to go, or else the city will have to pay to bus them elsewhere. It's just an potential additional expense that the taxpayers of the city are going to have to underwrite. I just shared with you the pictures of some of the water runoff. Again, I'm in these, as part of the Goose Pond Subcommittee, I walk these trails with my dog every day. Unfortunately, we're having a very dry spell. It's the first time I've seen some of these streams dry up. It's usually very wet. There's a trail just below where this supposed catch basin is going to be. It's always wet. It's always full of ice if you try going through there. I think the traffic, again, it's been cited. I think the traffic studies, again, if I go and look at what the state says for 100 units, they're up to 200 trips per day. Again, the estimate that was stated is 179. It's a little low. I would like to remind the board that and I'm not questioning their honesty or integrity, but they're all been hired by the developer to find in his favor. And if the board doesn't address some of these issues, as with the parking, the water, the traffic, I would like to point out, as Mary pointed out, there's clear view, and either way on Timberlane Drive. The same thing applies to Route 9 and Washington Street, and there are a lot of accidents there, and it's even a longer point of view. People come down that hill fast, especially now that it's just been paved. It's almost like a racetrack. These are things that this board is, I believe, going to have to consider. Either put a speed bump before that. I guess I'm just pointing out that, again, I'm not, as Paul Kutras pointed out, I'm not against development if it had been if it's a smaller development, or if it was 4 or 5 homes, I wouldn't be here. I think that would be adequate. I think it's too much for this area. It's not in the character of this area. And I just hope that the board, I know they want to approve housing, and we all get that, but you're going to be doing that over the concerns of the individuals who live here. And I thank you.
Thank you. I just need to remind you that we base our decision on the 19 standards that are provided to us. We rely on staff to provide us for that information, and everyone on this board makes their own decision with the information that we receive. And I feel that all of the information that we receive from staff and applicants is helpful for us to make the decision moving forward. So when you're talking about different areas, I recommend that you look at the 19 standards that we have to follow.
I have, and
okay, because if you look at those closely, there are some things that we don't have any control over.
I understand that.
Okay.
And that's why I tried to point out the things that I saw, to my understanding, or within your purview.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, I'll need the pictures back later, or do you need to make copies of them? All right, I'll get them later.
Is there anyone else that would like to make a comment before I close out the public hearing? Anyone else from the public? Okay, so at this moment, I will close the public comment portion of the deliberation. And is there a motion to continue the public hearing?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd move to continue the public hearing for S-04-22 and SP SPR-04-22 to the September 26, 2022 Planning Board meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. The next item on the agenda is SPR 898, modification number 1, site plan, EVS, Metal Edition, 50 Optical Ave. Applicant Brickstone Land Use Consultants, on behalf of owner 50 Optical Avenue LLC, proposes to construct a 25,200 square foot addition on the existing 28,932 square foot building on the property located at 50 Optical Avenue, tax map number 241-007-000. The site is a 4.94 acre in size and is located in the industrial district. Does staff have recommendation for completeness of the application?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jesse Rounds, Director, Community Development. The applicant requests exemptions from submitting a traffic analysis, soil analysis, historic evaluation, screening analysis, and architectural and visual appearance analysis. After reviewing each request, staff has determined that exempting the applicant from submitting this information would have no bearing on the merits of the application and recommends that the Planning Board grant these exemptions and accept the application as complete.
Thank you. Is there a motion to accept the application as complete?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd move to find the application complete.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. And I invite Mr. Fippert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jim Pippard. I'm with Brickstone Land Use Consultants here in Keene, and I'm here representing EVS Metals. Sorry. I'm here tonight representing EVS Metals. Their existing facility is located in the industrial park on the east side of Keene at 50 Optical Avenue. If you look at the plan before you, Optical Avenue is the roadway surrounding two sides of the site. This is roughly the middle of the industrial park area. Across the street is Mountain Corporation, and to the north or east is Sunset Tool, and Sampson Manufacturing is located here to the north. So this is an existing facility, a little over 28,000 square feet in size. We're proposing to add a new addition in this area, 25,200 square feet. So it's an addition at the rear of the building. This would be all manufacturing and warehouse space. So the office space, which is existing here at the front of the building, is not changing with this proposal. So this is to create new floor area for working and for storing materials. If you went to the site today, there's a parking lot that's existing here at this location. That would obviously be removed. We're going to relocate that parking to the east side of the site, and we'll be providing 56 new parking spaces in that location. There's existing parking at the office area that will remain unchanged. During the site visit, there were questions about cars and trucks parking in a grassy and gravel area here to the north side of the site. I spoke to the shop manager who's here with me tonight, and they are discontinuing that practice. They will no longer be parking in that area. This area will be restored with loam and seeded and be part of the grass area. But they've been parking there, I think, since 2000, which was the last site plan I did on this property when they built this addition. So anyway, this new addition.
I just want to add, the reason I asked that question is because when we received the plan the first time, it was not on there. But when we did the site visit, it was on there, so that's why I brought it up.
The practice is
know.
being discontinued, and that'll be restored as lawn area.
I know, and I appreciate that, thank you.
All those bad boys were reprimanded. This area, being the industrial park, is obviously served by city water and city sewer. The existing services are shown on the plan, servicing the existing building. They will be extended, if you will, into the addition. The addition will be sprinkled, just as the main building is sprinkled. The 6-inch water line that's existing is adequate to support that sprinkler system. And the bathrooms here are serviced by 4-inch sewer lines that come out to Optical Avenue. For drainage, we went to the site. We did a series of 4 test pits through this area of the property. And as expected, it's all clean sands, no groundwater down to a depth of 7 feet. So it was an ideal situation for an infiltration system. And that's what we'll be doing with stormwater runoff. So the new runoff from the roof and from the new parking area will be collected on site. This area to the east of that new parking area is an infiltration basin. It's been designed to completely store and infiltrate a 25-year design storm, which by today's standards is almost 5 inches of rain. A lot more than it was back in 2000 when we did the original addition. But with the excellent soils here and the excellent groundwater conditions, it's a perfect drainage system for this site. So that won't be a problem at all. They propose to add up to 20 new employees. They're hoping to find 20 new employees. Very difficult to do. They've been looking for quite a while already. But with the addition, they will need more employees to meet their manufacturing requirements. So they're working hard to do that. The 20 more employees, they currently work 2 shifts. They start at 6 in the morning until 2:30, and that's 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And then from 2:30 to 1 a.m., 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday. So any new employees will be arriving at the site either at 6 a.m. or at 2:30 p.m., which are off-peak hours. So that additional traffic, 20 employees, even if they all work the same shift, is not going to have a significant impact on the safety or capacity of Optical Avenue and Route 101, which is a signalized intersection. So we're in great shape traffic-wise. There are 2 existing curb cuts for access to the property, and those are remaining. We're not altering those other than they point to go from that driveway to the new parking area. The fire chief requested, or somebody at the fire department requested, that we do a plan showing that we have adequate turning radiuses for emergency vehicles and fire equipment to get through the site. And I submitted a plan. That's lighting. I did submit a plan to planning. Jesse's nodding his head. And it shows that a fire truck can easily be accommodated to drive through the site. So it was, I didn't hear anything back, so I'm assuming that issue was addressed. As far as new lighting, there will be wall-mounted units mounted 15 feet above the ground, and they'll be on light poles, excuse me, on 20-foot poles, all full cut-off LED fixtures. The light levels, when the lights are on, will be around 1.5-foot candles, which is a very low amount of light. But this isn't a retail parking area, it's an industrial area, so it's employees parking going in and out of the building. After 1 o'clock in the morning, they'll be reduced by 50%. LED fixtures today, almost all of them you can buy are programmable. And you can build the timing in, you can build when they reduce the amount of lighting or when they shut off. So 50% light levels, less than 1 foot candle after 1 a.m. Landscaping, there was a lot of discussion between me and staff about meeting the landscape standard. Initially, and this was my fault, I still thought of the landscaping standard as being part of the land use code. And when the changes were all made, it got pulled out of the code as a development standard, and it's now an ordinance. So under the city ordinances, you can't give me a waiver from anything to do with that landscaping. I would have to get a variance. Obviously, we didn't want to do that. So I revised our parking plan. I eliminated parking spaces here, and I eliminated what would be a striped area here that we were going to use for material storage, for materials.
SOS.
Hopefully I didn't do that. And I added landscaped islands in these areas. So this area is over 300 square feet in size. 95 square feet is the recommended minimum size. This area is almost 700 square feet in size. And we're planting 4 trees in the larger area and 2 in this area. For the last, 15 years, when we figure green space in parking areas, when we figured green space in the parking areas, we always counted these islands in the corner areas of the parking lot. And I consider that within the parking lot. Staff feels the intent of the regulation was to have the trees more dispersed through the parking field to break up the expanse of pavement. And this design for a parking lot, this isn't like a retail lot where we have row after row after row, and we can do long medians that are landscaped with trees planted. The medians, just by their shape and the curbing, do a good job of protecting the trees. But if I eliminate a space here and there throughout the parking field, those trees won't be protected. Those trees will be damaged during snow plowing. They'll be piling snow on those islands. If you look at the shape of the parking lot, when they do plow snow, if we ever get snow again, they're going to push north and south. And they'll be piling snow in these areas at both ends of the parking field. They're not going to push snow this way into our infiltration area. That violates the design intent. That's for stormwater, and it shouldn't be filled up with snow and ice in the winter because that can prevent the infiltration from operating properly. So the snow will go to both ends, and they'll be pushing the length of the parking field. If you put trees in 3 or 4 locations through there, they're either going to dump the snow where the tree is, or within 4 or 5 years, the tree will be gone. And I base that on experience. I've done this a long time. I was proud owner of a property management company for more than 10 years and learned from experience. So I'm asking the planning board to approve this layout for landscaping within my parking area. I feel it will do the best job to preserve and protect those trees, and I think it meets the intent of the regulation. For screening, we are, this area, if you went to the site visit, and it was a good turnout last time, thank you. You could see this is all a forested area today. And we're preserving almost 30 feet of trees along this easternmost boundary and the southernmost boundary to screen this parking field from the public right-of-way and from the adjacent users. And then the new trees planted in these areas will add to that screening effect from the public view and from Sampson Manufacturing to the north. And as I said, all the parking from this area of Optical Ave is at the rear of the building, so the building itself is a pretty effective screen. There will be a rooftop unit or 2 mounted in the new addition, and those will be screened with physical screening constructed at the rooftop. There'll be no impact to wetlands. Obviously, there's no wetlands on a site like this. There's very little water anywhere on this site, as our test pit showed. Architecture and visual appearance. We're going to match the appearance of the existing building. So this is the view looking to the west to the south, I'm sorry, here's the office area addition, which is the brick portion of the building. And the existing manufacturing is concrete block, CMU, that's painted a white color. The addition in the rear will be higher than the old building, 28 feet high, and that allows for longer clear spans within that manufacturing area, which is very important. And so these are the elevations of that newly constructed addition. There will be louvers installed for air handling, which is another important part of manufacturing, the work environment. And it will be a flat roof. We show the screening of the rooftop unit here, and you can see it in each of the elevations. So the materials, the colors are going to match what's existing at the site today, which is appropriate in an industrial park. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Do any board members have any questions of or for the applicant? No questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll take staff comments. I think, Jesse, you're doing the staff comments?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank
Jesse
you.
Rounds. And the applicant's presentation was very thorough, so I don't really want to take any more time except to note a little bit more about the landscaping. The standard states that more than half of the required parking lot landscaping shall be either in continuous landscape strips or in large planting islands, which are a minimum of 95 square feet, located entirely within the paved area of the parking lot, in order to break up the visual expansiveness of the lot. Now, the section 9.4.5.5 of the LDC states that the planning board may approve an alternative design for interior landscaping of parking lots as part of the site plan review, if they determine the proposed design generally meets the intent of this article. So I guess the only thing I would add beyond that is that if the applicant proposes not to provide interior landscaping or proposes a landscape plan which, in the determination of the board, does not meet the intent of the zoning ordinance, a variance would be required from the zoning board of adjustment. Other than that, I feel like the applicant covered everything very thoroughly.
Do board members have questions for staff? I mean, I went to this site visit, and we've talked about this a little bit, Mary. That I'm not seeing where the ordinance actually fits into this property, and I think that is something that the board needs to look into. And is that being addressed by any chance in our rules of procedure at all? Would it be in that, or would it be?
So, Madam Chair, it's definitely something that staff can take a look at. It would be a modification to the Land Development Code. I think right now, the issue that we're running into is typically an applicant could request a waiver from a standard, and they could get the waiver granted by the planning board at the same meeting that the site plan is being reviewed. With the parking regulations being located in zoning, that's kind of what's complicating the issue here. So one thing that I think staff is going to look into is there a way that we can add a provision for an applicant to get a waiver versus a variance when they're coming before the planning board for an alternate design? So that's something that we can look into. And then for tonight, I think it's really just a decision that the board needs to make. Does this alternative design that's been presented to you tonight meet the intent of the standard in your determination? And that's really not a call that staff can make. It has to be a call of this board.
Of the board?
Yep.
Okay. So I know there were like 5 of us at this, I think there were 5 of us at this site visit, and I've been doing this for quite a while, but this is a very unusual site in general, and I would like to see us approve this the way it is. So, but I would like some feedback from the board. I think Jim, if maybe you could point out on here the way the parking lot is going to, it comes right up pretty much close to the building, but then it's also, on the other side is the woods. And so I think it would be, and please, anyone feel free to jump in. I feel adding trees down the middle of this is just not going to work in that particular area, and we don't have a way, as the board doesn't have a way to address that. And so I know there are a few of us there, so they may have seen it, but if you could just point out what I'm talking about, that might help the board a little bit. Please.
Thank you. I'll point out that the pavement comes right up to the building. So here's our parking spaces. Normally, I would design a parking lot so there was at least 10 feet away from the building. There could be a landscape strip, a grass strip. We might do infiltration there, but it's a buffer between the parking spaces and the building. But at this manufacturing facility, they use this area adjacent to the building. You saw it when you were at the site visit. Pallets are there. They don't want to take up floor space inside their manufacturing space with an empty pallet or a pile of empty pallets. So they will make space out in the parking lot. In the earlier designs that I did, this area was striped out to store materials like that. They're also bringing in work product that has to be brought. It gets delivered to the site, and then it has to be brought into the building to be brought into the manufacturing process. They do what they're doing, manufacturing their product, and then it gets shipped out in trucks. And the loading dock for those deliveries is here. So in this area, they're utilizing that space adjacent to the building. And we couldn't make it a green space. And that's normally where I would put trees along the perimeter so they don't interfere with the maintenance of the parking lot and parking cars and moving the work product. So it's, the ordinance, the way it's written, made sense. And I was on the committee where we talked about all that, and I understood what they were talking about, but I'm thinking of large retail parking lots where there might be 6 or 8 or 10 rows of parking, and we do the long landscape strips in between the rows. And then we just do battle with making pathways through them so they don't constantly walk over the root balls and compact the soil. So we try to make enough pathways so they'll respect that. But that's a whole different problem. So I understand where staff was coming from, but I agree with the chairman. I don't think it fits this type of facility and this orientation of parking. So I did what I felt was fair and reasonable, and I look back over the last 20 years, all the site plans that I did, we always counted these areas, these large landscaped islands, even though they're not in the middle of a field, as part of the field. And that was how we would meet our 10% green space requirement. So I think the language could be clarified, or maybe we need to distinguish between residential parking and industrial parking, where an industrial parking lot is actually doubling as part of the workspace for this industry.
We're going to work on that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else from the board have any questions? Mr. Farrington.
Yeah, sorry, not a question. I just wanted to affirm my opinion that I share with you, that I think this is adequately screened from the road. The road is, not really used by the public that much. And so I don't think the issue of the trees is a huge problem here.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Cost.
Thank you. It also seems like if we were to put more trees in the parking lot, then we would end up maybe expanding the parking lot more towards the drainage area. So this way you've reduced the amount of pavement, which I think is very efficient, and maybe causes less harm and maybe less damage to the tree line behind it, which is a very solid screening. So I agree also that it makes sense.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Is there any?
I'll
Okay.
comment also, thank you, that I'm in agreement as well. Visiting the site, the practicality of making it easy for snow plowing, and it won't collect trash and leaves and such. It's just, it is part of the workplace. So I concur. I just wanted to add that as well.
Thank you. Anyone else? Is there anyone here from the public? I don't see any, so I close the public comment portion for deliberation. Does anyone else from the board have any other kind of comments? Councilor Remy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just think this is, I generally want to thank the applicant for bringing forward development in this area and adding jobs and adding a good use down here, I think. So from my perspective, I think it's a great use of the spot.
Thank you. Anyone else? Is there a motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd agree with the consensus of the board. I would move, furthermore, I'd move to approve SPR-898 Mod 1 as shown on the plan identified as EVS Metal Addition 50 Optical Avenue, Keene, New Hampshire, prepared by SVE Associates and Brickstone Land Use Consultants at a scale of 1 inch equals 30 feet, dated June 15th, 2022, and last revised July 6th, 2022. And the architectural elevations prepared by DB Architects LLC at a scale of 1/16 of an inch to 1 foot, dated June 13, 2022, with the following conditions precedent prior to signature of the planning board chair. Number 1, owner's signature appears on plan. Number 2, submittal of a security for landscaping, sedimentation, and erosion control, and as-built plans in a form and amount acceptable to the city engineer.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you.
Thank you.
And make sure those bad boys move their vehicles. Okay, so next up is EXP 0-22 and CUHP -0-22 earth excavation permit and hillside protection conditional use permit 0 Route 9. Applicant TF Moran on behalf of owner GT Holdings LLC proposes to operate a gravel pit on the underdeveloped property located at 0 Route 9, tax map number 215-007-000-000-000. A hillside protection conditional use permit is requested for impacts to steep slopes. Waivers are requested from the following sections of Article 24 of the Land Development Code, 24.3.1.a 200-foot public road setback, 24.3.1c 150-foot access driveway setback, 24.3.1d surface water rescue setbacks, 24.3.4 and 24.3.5 groundwater quantity and quality baseline measurements, 24.313 maximum excavation area, and 24.3.15.d annual noise monitoring. The site is 84.71 acres in size and is located in the rural district. And I would invite the applicant to present, to delay the public hearing and answer any questions. And could you please give your name? Thank you. And thank you for waiting for so long.
No problem. I'm Jeff Cavan with TF Moran's office representing the owner of the property. So we had requested a continuation. There had been, the owner had done some work out there. They thought they could do a little bit of work and use material for their own business without it falling under the gravel pit ordinance or criteria. When we became aware of this, we suggested he stop work. We contacted the NHDES, let them know what was going on. We had filed an application with them. We're amend that application to an after the fact, which incorporates some additional information. We met with staff out on the property and discussed, I guess, stabilization and some remedy of the area outside what we're proposing is the gravel pit area. And so we're asking to be continued into the next meeting. We had filed some follow-up information for town's consultant to review, but we'll add in, I guess, like a current condition and how we're remediating that situation.
Do board members have any questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you. I'm supposed to invite the public to ask if they ask any questions, but I don't think there's anyone here. So with that said, I'm going to close the public comment portion here. And do any board members have any questions about this for the extension? If not, I'll entertain a motion, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd move to continue the public hearing for EXP-01-22 and CUHP-01-22 to the August 22nd, or it would be September, right? No, August? August 22nd, 2022 Planning Board meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you very much. So I am going to invite the staff to present the draft rules of procedure, and I believe that's in our packet.
Yes, Madam Chair, I do have a, have a presentation, so if you'll give me a moment, I'm just going to load that up really quick.
Thank you, Mary.
I'll try to get through this as efficiently as possible. Sorry, what was that? Okay. Thank you. Oops.
Well, while we're waiting, I did want you to look at the last 2 pages of your packet, because those are all of the projects that it's in your packet that we don't see that come to the board, and it gets approved by staff. So if there's any kind of questions that you have about the project, you're most certainly welcome to reach out to staff and ask. But I know there's several of you that are new, but this is something that we will get updated by staff a couple times a year.
I actually have a question for the AV technician who just left. So I have the presentation up on my screen, and I'm screen sharing through the Zoom, so I'm hoping the AV technician will be able to get it on the screen.
We can continue it next month if we need to, Mary, if he can't pull that up. Because I think it'd be easier, well, it would for me, to see it up there.
Well, yeah, if you could please ask him. Yeah, so I think Jesse is going to go check to see if they can get it. Oh,
thank you. Thank you, Jesse. There you go.
Perfect. Okay, so the draft rules of procedure that I included, or that were included in your packet, are proposed updates to the rules of procedure that were last created in 1990. And so before I just start going through the proposed changes, I wanted to make a note of the fact that the requirements in state statute are pretty minimal, but they do state the entire requirement in the state statute is up on the screen right now. But they do state that the one requirement really is that the rules of procedure shall include when and how an alternate may participate in meetings of the land use board. And we actually don't have that in our current rules of procedure. So that's one of the things that we're proposing to update. So what I've done with this PowerPoint presentation is I've gone through each of the sections of the proposed rules of procedure, and then on the left will be what's currently in the rules of procedure, and on the right is what's proposed. So the first section is the authority adoption and amendment. Currently, the rules of procedure do note where the authority comes from in the RSA. However, it doesn't specify the process for adoption or the process for amendment. So we are proposing to include more clarification on the process. With respect to membership, the current rules of procedure just state that there are 9 members and 5 needed for quorum. It doesn't mention alternate members or how vacancies will be filled or the term limits or anything like that. It does mention that there's a chair and a vice chair that are elected by majority vote in January of each year. What we're proposing is to be a little bit more specific, and this is actually all detailed in the state RSA, that we have to have 9 members because we're a city. One of the members has to be the mayor or the mayor's designee. There has to be an admin official. One of the members has to be a city councilor, and then the other 6 members have to be Keene residents. So that's all specified in the RSA, so we put that in the rules of procedure just to make it clear, and that's also in city code. We also made it clear that the terms are for 3-year terms, that you can have up to 5 alternates, and that vacancies in a term can be filled by the mayor by appointment for the unexpired balance of the term. So if there's somebody who leaves in the middle of their term, we can appoint someone to fill that term for the balance of the time remaining on the term. And then just a slight change for the officers, that they would be elected at the first regular meeting of the calendar year in case there isn't a meeting in January. It's just to be consistent with also how other boards have worded that provision.
Mary?
Yes.
I just have a quick question. If you can go back to that slide.
Mm-hmm.
Because when someone fills someone's appointment for an unexpired balance of the term, that does not actually count toward the full term if you had been, like, it's almost non-existent. Like, it doesn't count toward a term, which is why I'm on here so long. But, so I just think that needs to be in there somewhere. Like, let's say someone, knock on wood, has to leave the board. They're in the middle of their term. Someone can get appointed, but that does not count toward a full term at all. Just for a little clarity, because that wasn't made too clear to me. Just saying. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to clarify, it's the practice, and I don't know if this is written out anywhere, that if you're filling in for a term and you're filling less than half of that term, it doesn't count as a full term. But we can clarify that.
Yes, would you clarify that for me, please? Thanks.
All right.
Is there a term limit that we're trying to, I guess I don't understand why that matters. I guess I don't know.
Yes, there's a 2-term limit.
Okay, it does not count, so okay, that's what I was.
So if you've been on here for 14 months, that does not count toward any term, so you get...
You get 2 more.
You get 2 more full terms. Just saying.
Thank you. So the next section is the steering committee and subcommittees. So the planning board right now, as everyone should probably be aware, has a steering committee that's comprised of the chair, the vice chair, and a 3rd member that's elected by the board. And the role of that steering committee is to have monthly meetings with staff to go over the agenda, set the order of the agenda, determine if there's going to be a site visit for any of the projects that month. And so right now, the rules of procedure don't really talk about the steering committee at all, so we just put that into the proposed rules of procedure. And we also included a section on subcommittees, basically stating that the board can form subcommittees if you want to, and states that those would be public bodies created by a vote of the board for a specific purpose, and that their role would be advisory to the planning board. So meetings is probably the largest section in the rules of procedure. So right now, in your rules of procedure, it says that the regular meetings will be the fourth Monday of the month, and that other meetings may be called on an as-needed basis, and that the Roberts Rules of Order will cover any details not covered in the rules of procedure, and so that's all the same in what we're proposing. However, the current rules of procedure refer to something called executive sessions, which used to be in city code but no longer exists. So that's something that's not really relevant anymore. However, something that is relevant is something called non-public sessions, which is covered under RSA 91A3, which is part of the New Hampshire Right to Know law. And so we included information about non-public sessions and how those should be conducted, the process to go into a non-public session, what to do with the minutes, filing, all of that. To my knowledge, the board has never gone into a non-public session, so I don't know how often this will be used, but we have it there in case it's ever required. And then finally for this slide, the agenda in our current rules of procedure, it says that the planning director will prepare the agenda, but that it may be amended by the board during the meeting. And what we're proposing is that it would be prepared by staff in consultation with the steering committee or the
Mayor Hansel has a question.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering why we need the maybe amended by the board during the meeting. Couldn't they just, I mean, wouldn't they have to vote to suspend the rules to really modify the agenda anyway?
What we're proposing is that the board may decide, I think it would have to be by consensus, or if somebody disagrees, you'd want to do a vote, but you can amend the agenda in terms of taking it out of order. However, there's a separate section in the rules of procedure that says you can't discuss new items that weren't included on the agenda at all. So I think what this is saying is that you can change around the order. You can't discuss something that wasn't included on the agenda because that would be in violation with the right to know law.
I mean, I just think that language seems kind of ambiguous to me.
Okay.
It's and I'm not sure it's necessary.
What would you like it to say? What do you think it
I'm
should
just
say?
not sure it's necessary at all. I think there are provisions in the rules to allow for changes to the agenda, or you can suspend the rules. And it's up to the chair. Really, the chair has the authority to move things up or down the agenda via consensus. I don't think it needs to be called out there.
Yep, and I can, so the exact wording in the rules of procedure, because what I have up on the screen is paraphrased, says the meeting agenda shall be prepared by the community development director or their designee in consultation with the steering committee or the chair, although the board shall retain the right to adjust that agenda during the course of its meeting. So I'm not sure if that addresses your concern, if we, yeah.
I mean, it really doesn't. I think the chair has that prerogative no matter what. And in the case that there's a substantial change, like an addition or you know, to do something else, and there are other rules that exist, or suspension of the rules is possible for them to do that. I think saying it may be amended by the board sort of, when I first read that, I'm like, really? So they could bring some new item in? It's kind of just unclear. I don't think you need that in there.
Okay.
But that's just my opinion.
Any other questions on this slide?
So how do we fix that?
So we can strike that and just say the meeting agenda shall be prepared by the community development director or their designee in consultation with the steering committee or the chair, period. Items to be placed on the meeting agenda must be received by the director a minimum of 5 business days prior to the scheduled meeting. No subject matter that is not on the agenda shall be discussed at the meeting, but shall be referenced under new business and shall be placed on the agenda for discussion at the next regular meeting. So that's how the section would read if we took out that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Next is quorum. So our current rules of procedure state that for a quorum you need 5 members. However, it doesn't really mention the role of alternates. The proposed rules of procedure states that, again, you need 5 members and that alternates can be designated by the chair. And it further states that alternates should continue to serve in the place of a regular member if the business extends over multiple meetings. So basically, if a public hearing gets continued and an alternate was sitting on that public hearing, that alternate should continue to sit on that public hearing. And that's just kind of a best practice because they've heard all the public testimony, they've heard the applicant's presentation, and they have all the background knowledge to continue to sit on that item. So we're proposing to put that into the rules of procedure.
Does that mean that the regular members not participating in the continued meeting?
They could participate. It depends on where the board is at with, in terms of numbers for quorum, but if a regular member is absent when the public hearing is first heard and first opened, at the meeting where the public hearing was first opened, but then that member comes to the next meeting and there aren't enough spaces for the alternate to participate as a voting member, then yeah, they wouldn't sit on that item.
Mayor Hansel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I gotta make an argument to take that out as well. I mean, I think that is a best practice, but I wouldn't want that to be an expectation of a petitioner. If there was a continued public hearing, or to give them sort of something to, I wouldn't want to set that as an expectation because I don't think that's reasonable. It certainly, I understand the logic, it's best practice, but I wouldn't put it in our rules.
Okay. And I can read, so the way that this is worded right now, it says, whenever a regular planning board member is absent or disqualified, the chair shall designate an alternate to act in the absent or disqualified member's place, except that only the alternate designated for the city council shall serve in place of that member. And that provision comes right out of the state RSA, so we can't change that. Unless the appointed alternate member becomes unable to continue to participate, the alternate member so appointed should continue to serve in the place of the absent regular member if a matter under consideration by the board extends over multiple meetings and/or until that matter has been completed. So it would be that last sentence there that says, unless the appointed alternate member becomes unable to continue to participate and so on, that would be removed.
Do we have to keep the part that says alternates should continue to serve in place of a regular member if business extends over multiple meetings? I'm arguing we should take that out of our rules altogether. I wouldn't want to set that expectation for a petitioner.
Okay. Yep, and I was just reading the language, how it reads in the actual, so what's up on the screen is paraphrased. It's not the exact wording that's in the document. So I was just reading the full section to confirm that that's what you want removed.
I would remove any reference to alternates continuing to serve in, over multiple meetings.
Councilor Remy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually disagree. I don't see a harm in it because of the language that you just quoted where, as it shows on the screen, I have a problem with it, but to your point, it's not what's actually in the language. The fact that if the alternate was not available, then there's no expectation that they have to be available. Basically, the way that you have it written in there is that if the alternate missed the next one, then it could go back to the regular member. I get your point of like it doesn't. I just don't think having it not addressed at all is. I think it's a very good best practice. I guess the point is like I'd rather have it there as like this is the suggestion for future boards to do this. But I guess you could just add at the end at the discretion of the chair or something, and then it makes it so that at the end of the day the board gets full control of it. But I don't know.
I mean, Madam Chair, if I can, I just don't see the point. We can do it as a best practice, and that's fine. I mean, but it doesn't have any enforceability. It's just there literally as a reminder. Serves, in my mind, it's probably more of a liability for the board than it is a benefit.
Thank you. If it's not in there, can we do that, or is that in violation of what we have in there? To say that you're a regular member, you're present, but you weren't here for the last one, so I'm pulling the alternate instead? Or do we have, I don't know that we have that authority to say, I know you're here as a regular member, but you're not on the board tonight.
That's a good question.
So if it's not in there, I don't know if we have those, or is that right?
Can,
That's the chair. You can,
I like this spot.
Look, I don't want you here.
Mary, so can the chair do that?
I think so, but I can also clarify with the city
Could you,
attorney.
could
if
you get
would-
that, could you clarify that for us then?
Yes.
I mean, I've been in the board long enough to know that we did things a little bit differently with the last couple of chairs when it came to alternates, and I could really, and you and I have already talked about this, I could really use some clarity on this, on exactly what,
I would show it to the city attorney. I think the city attorney's gonna not want this in there either, but I could be wrong about that.
Yep, so the draft rules of procedure have been reviewed by the city attorney, and I actually stole this language from other boards' rules of procedures that the city attorney wrote. But I do see your point that it's a best practice, but it's not a firm like requirement. It says should, not shall. So it's not, I don't think it would be harmful to take it out, if that makes sense.
why don't you ask the city attorney if it's okay if you took it out, and then come back to us with it? And then people can decide how, because I know you two are, I'm kind of sitting in the middle. I just want to, I'm not sure. I mean, it's a little confusing to me, so.
I just don't want a petitioner to come in and then have their hearing continued, not have the same person, and then look at our rules and say, well, you know, I was treated unfairly because you're not even following your own rules. You didn't have the alternate here for both meetings, which I think is an unreasonable expectation of the board.
I understand, and I think that's a really good question to ask Attorney Mullins. I mean, luckily tonight, we have a full board. We're missing a couple, no, it's not. I mean, this is a really good night, but it would be helpful to know. I mean, we've got couple public hearings continuing, and this kind of fits right in there, honestly. I'm sorry, Emily, you'd have a question too?
I think I just have a comment as far as this is one of my first experiences of a continuation of a public hearing, like from the last one. And I think if it wasn't in there, but I knew that you had the control to, I wouldn't personally feel comfortable if I had missed last meeting, came and sat, and an alternate had sat at last meeting and heard all of the public comments. I would want them to continue, and I would respect the control that you had to say that they were a voting member over me.
Thank you. I hear what you're saying. Can you just, could you take that back to him and maybe bring that back to us? Thank you
Yes,
very
yep.
much, Mary.
Great. So the next section is on remote participation, which currently the rules of procedure do not address. And we're proposing to add a section on remote participation that says a board member may participate by telephone or other electronic communication, quote, remotely, with the approval of the board when the member's attendance is not reasonably practical. The reason for absence is stated in the minutes. The remote member states where they are physically located and who is present in that location with them. All participants, including the public, must be able to hear, read, and discern the meeting with discussion. Members participating remotely may vote, but shall not count toward quorum. All votes must be taken by roll call. The presiding officer shall be physically present at the meeting location specified in the meeting notice. So basically, that last piece is basically saying whoever's chairing the meeting has to be physically present. They cannot be participating remotely. And this is what our practice as a board has been throughout COVID and since. So I put that in there as a proposal for the board to consider, just so that it's clear how remote participation can occur moving forward. Okay.
Any questions? Mr. Harrington?
Yeah, I thought during COVID we did everybody remote, so we wouldn't never have had a quorum.
Right, so I guess after the emergency order was ended, but COVID was still happening, that's sort of how we handled the hybrid situation where we had to have a quorum physically present in the room, but some members were participating remotely. those are sort of the rules that we followed. So even if just one person is participating remotely, we have to do all roll call votes. Yeah. Okay. All right, so the next section under meetings is the order of business. This is something that isn't currently addressed at all in the rules of procedure. And so I added the general order of business being call to order, roll call of attendance, acceptance of minutes, and then number 4 is basically the meat of the meeting. So non-binding consultations, application reviews, public hearings, discussions, and decisions. And then number 5, reports and other business, including advice and consideration, and then adjournment. That's something that I took out of other rules of procedure as well. And again, seemed like a best practice to note in your rules of procedure. Any questions?
Council Remy.
Thank you. On that, we traditionally have a new business section specifically called out in our agendas for people to bring up anything they want to talk about for the next one.
Well, that's true.
I don't know if we want to add that in.
Yep, I think we could add new business right before adjournment if everyone is in agreement with that.
Add it into 6 and push. Not that we frequently have stuff that comes up in there, but I always like the question.
Any other questions about that piece? So under the presiding officer, this is something that has come up in the past where rarely, but it does occur where both the chair and the vice chair are unable to be present. And so having in the rules of procedure a clear process for what happens in that instance. So right now, the rules of procedure just say if the chair can't be present, then the vice chair will run the meeting. It doesn't say what happens when both are not present. So what we're proposing to say is when both the chair and the vice chair cannot be present and a quorum is present, the members who are present will elect a temporary chair until either the vice chair or chair joins the meeting.
Council Remy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just the last 5 words of the actual language are a little bit confusing just because it says until the presiding officer appears. I think it needs to say like until the chair or vice chair appears, because at that point that person is the presiding officer.
Yep. Any other questions on that section? Okay.
No, I don't. Thank you.
So this section is called right of floor, and this is another section that I saw in many of the other rules of procedure that other boards have that the planning board currently doesn't address. And basically, this is kind of going over what the conduct of the meeting should be. So it says that the presiding officer should be controlling the meeting. All comments should go through the chair. Comments have to be related to the question under debate, and the comments cannot be personal in nature or impugn the motives of any individual's vote. And it also says that the chair shall act on all proper motions for which there is a second. So that's just something that I think it's pretty standard language that I saw when I was looking at other planning boards' rules of procedure. And so I added it in, but I don't know if there's any comments on that. Okay. So this next section is on motions, voting, and conflict of interest. So right now, our rules of procedure, or the planning board's rules of procedure, don't really address motions at all. So we just put in a simple statement that says motions, if duly seconded, will carry by a majority vote unless otherwise specified in these rules of procedure. It also specifies what happens when there's a tie vote. In the case of a tie vote, the motion shall be deemed defeated. Are there any questions about that? There's a section on conflict of interest, which again I took from kind of the standard language that the city has for other boards and committees. The planning board is a quasi-judicial board. So in the case of the planning board, anytime a member has a direct personal or pecuniary interest in the outcome which differs from the interest of other citizens, or if that member would be disqualified for any cause to act as a juror upon the trial of the same matter in any action at law, then that's when a board member should be recusing themselves. Then if there's any uncertainty, you can bring it up to the board, and you should bring it up to the board before the public hearing is opened, and then the board can always take an advisory vote as to whether or not you should be recused. And then if a member is disqualified or unable to act in any particular case, the chair shall designate an alternate to act in the member's place. Any questions on that? Okay. With respect to the minutes, what the current rules of procedure say is that the planning director is responsible for taking the minutes and keeping them. It states that the official minutes are in writing and reviewed and voted on by the board. It doesn't specify how they should be filed, and it also makes a note of tape recordings being for convenience only and saying that they must be kept for 3 years. So what we're proposing is that the minutes shall be taken in accordance with RSA 91A2. We're keeping the statement saying that the official minutes are in writing and are those that have been reviewed and voted on by the board. We wanted to clarify that they should be filed with the city clerk, which is a requirement of the state RSA. And we also kept the statement that recordings are for convenience only. However, we took out the tape recording because that's not really used anymore. And we felt that it wasn't necessary to have a time frame for keeping the tape recordings or the recordings, especially since it's for convenience only and they're not considered the official minutes. So that's what we're proposing. Any questions on this? And this was also language that is standard across city boards and committees.
Okay, so what does that mean? Before, they were only going to keep them for 3 years, and now there's no...
Right, so I think at the time that the rules of procedure were written, a minute taker would actually have a physical tape recording that they were taking during the meeting just to help them with their minutes. And then that physical tape recording was considered a municipal record that was kept for 3 years. Now the recordings are digital, and I don't know how long we're keeping them or that we've been paying attention to whether or not we're keeping recordings for a certain amount of time or not. And I'm not sure that that's necessary. So the city attorney...
That would be a good question for the city attorney, whether we really need to keep them or not. I mean, we're a little short of storage, I believe.
Yeah, the city attorney felt that it wasn't necessary to have a time frame to keep the recordings just because they're really only for convenience for the minute taker.
Well, what are they going to do, keep them anyway?
Okay.
I just, there's no end here. It's like, are you going to keep them or aren't you going to keep them? And right now, we're keeping them. That's kind of what that says to me.
Well, yeah, it does say that we should be keeping them. I don't know that anyone has been keeping track of that.
Well, could you get back to us on that? Thanks.
Sure.
I'm not sure it's necessary, but. Thanks, Mary.
Of course. And the current rules of procedure do not address electronic communication. So this, again, is standard language that was brought in from other rules of procedure around email and other electronic communication among board members or between the board and the staff liaison, basically stating that that should really only be used for the transmittal of administrative information, things like whether or not you can make it to a meeting or what time and location the meeting is or where are we meeting to get to the site visit, things like that, or sending out information to the board. The staff liaison does that all the time. However, email should not be used to discuss any content that is going to be on the agenda for a public hearing. So the only discussion that happens around any of the projects on the agenda should be happening at the actual public meeting itself. So that's what that section is trying to clarify. Any questions on that? Board conduct is the last piece of this section. The current rules of procedure has a somewhat lengthy section on board conduct that says, members shall use caution when entering into any discussion of a project other than at a meeting. So we kept that piece. It also says that members shall not accept information such as phone calls, or packets relating to an item on the agenda unless it's at a meeting. And information that's being shared with the board shall be provided through the planning department. We just changed that to community development department. So those are the things that we kept. Other items that were included in the board conduct section that staff felt were not necessary or superfluous were the statement that a quorum of board members shall not meet outside of a regular meeting to discuss matters before the board. That is true. I think it's covered elsewhere in city code. And it also states that all deliberations except executive session shall be open to the public. Also true, but also already stated elsewhere. So that's our proposal for board conduct. Are there any questions on that?
Nope.
Okay. So coordination with other boards. This section currently states that the board shall meet with the finance committee to discuss the capital improvement program and the annual operating budget at least once per year. It also states that the board shall review all zoning ordinance and map changes and present their comments to city council. It says the board shall have at least one meeting per year with the ZBA, the Conservation Commission, the Planning, Lands, and License Committee, and the city manager. And it says the board shall establish and maintain communications with planning boards and other communities to discuss planning issues of mutual concern. So this section, while I think it was a great intent, I don't believe that the board, and at least in my time with the city, and I did ask the former planning director if this had ever been the practice while he was here, and he said no. So just to be more realistic with what the board actually does, what we're proposing is to change all of those shalls to mays. So the board may hold joint meetings with other city boards to discuss matters of mutual interest. We address how zoning amendments are handled in the statutory duties section of the rules of procedure. And that's about it. Any questions on that?
I have one question.
Nope, the steering committee is not considered a public body because it's just the chair, the vice chair, and a third member that's elected, and it's administrative matters that they discuss only. So like the order of the agenda, should we schedule a site visit, things like that. It's not, yes. There is a section on the steering committee in the rules, the proposed rules of procedure, yes, yep. That just basically it defines what the membership is and what their role is, so that it's clear. So the section on statutory duties goes over the duties of the planning board as outlined in state statute. So the first one being with respect to the zoning ordinance and amendments to the zoning ordinance. The city, after the 1990 rules of procedure were adopted, the city created a new process that's actually been established for, I think, about 15 years now, where the zoning ordinance amendments are actually handled through the joint committee of the planning board and the planning licenses and development committee. So the way that the rules of procedure right now talk about zoning amendments, it's basically stating that the planning board would review the proposed amendment, and then I believe like the chair would come to a city council meeting and present on the planning board's recommendation. And then from there, the city council would hold a public hearing. The city has created a new process with the joint committee of the planning board and the planning licenses and development committee, where there's a joint public workshop that's held And then the recommendation that comes out of that public workshop is sent back to City Council, and it goes from there. So we updated the rules of procedure to reflect that new process. Any questions? And I say new process, again, I think it's been in place for at least 15 years now. All right. Then the next one is the master plan. Right now in the rules of procedure, again, I think this is very ambitious, and ideally that's what we would be doing, but it says that we would update the master plan every 5 years. It also says that we would address 2 sections per year, keep it in a notebook form, and we would be seeking City Council review and adoption, and also holding a public hearing prior to adoption. So I think the way that the planning board used to handle the master plan is it was done chapter by chapter, and each chapter was kind of a standalone document. And so it made a lot more sense at that time to update specific sections of the master plan each year. The last update to the master plan that happened in 2010 was a comprehensive update, and it was, the whole document was updated all at once, and there's not really standalone chapters anymore. They're all very interlaced and related to each other. So you couldn't really update one section of the document without updating the whole document. So in light of that new format for the master plan, what staff is proposing is that the planning board review the master plan every 5 years, and then use your best efforts to update every 10 years. And you would work with the community development department, the PLD committee, and the city manager to maintain a schedule for review and updating the master plan. And then we kept the requirements to seek city council review and adoption, as well as holding a public hearing prior to adoption.
What year would that be? 2026 by any chance? When is it coming around?
Yep, so it's scheduled, it's in the CIP for fiscal year '24, so next year in July is when the first year of that will start.
Okay, thanks.
And then finally, with respect to statutory duties, under state statute, the planning board has a role with the capital improvement plan. So right now, the rules of procedure say that the board shall review annually and recommend revisions to city council. The board shall hold one meeting with the finance committee to review the plan. And the purpose of the review is to assure that the CIP reflects the principles and priorities of the master plan. So recently, the city council changed the CIP from an annual process to an every 2-year process. So we just updated the rules of procedure to reflect that. And we took away the requirement to hold one meeting with the finance committee every year because that wasn't really happening. And instead, the finance director was coming to the planning board meetings and presenting on the CIP. And we felt that that process has been working well. Okay. All right, so the Minor Project Review Committee. This is a new committee that was just created with the adoption of the Land Development Code. Under state statute, it's referred to as a technical review committee. And essentially, under the state statute, RSA 674-43-3, the planning board has the authority to delegate site plan review authority to a committee of qualified individuals such as staff. So the city of Keene adopted this, took advantage of this when the Land Development Code was adopted. So the rules of procedure just go through the authority for this committee, how it was established, the duties of the committee, which are up here on the screen, basically to hear and decide on minor site plan applications, to review and comment on proposed projects for site plan review or subdivision review prior to formal application submission, and to hear requests for extensions to minor site plan approvals. And then with respect to membership, right now the planning board is appointing specific individuals from staff. And in the instance where there's staff turnover, that has created a situation where it's made it difficult to get quorum. And so we're proposing, rather than appointing a specific person by name, instead appointing a person by their staff title. So for example, the Public Works Director or their designee, rather than saying Court Blomquist. And so we have, what we're proposing is the Public Works Director or their designee, the Community Development Director or their designee, the Zoning Administrator or their designee, the Fire Chief or their designee, and then a fifth designee of the City Manager. So currently, right now, Med Kopczynski, who's the Economic Development Director, would kind of fit that position. In the future, it could be, if we have a new Economic Development Director after, should Med leave the city, that person could be designated by the city manager. It kind of leaves it open to the city manager to decide that fifth position. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For this one, I'm trying to remember back to when we put this in. These have to be staff, right? You can't have members of the public on this review committee.
I think that's correct, but I would have to double check. I
think
can check that.
Remember that, and that was just something that I would love to have a member of the public involved in that, just as like a non-technical person, but I think I remember that it had to be staff.
Yep, I think that's the designee of the city manager is meant to be the non-technical person. But I can check to see if it's possible for a member of the public. Any other questions about this? Okay.
I'm really trying to remember why we made that decision, but I think we had a discussion about